If you have a declaration of war and really you're supposed to put the country on a war footing, I'm not sure that makes the most sense in fighting a threat that is as diffuse and networked as this threat is.
Democrat presidential candidate Hillary Clinton saying she's not inclined to support a formal declaration of war against ISIS, but that terror group continues on the march, committing atrocities, targeting Christians throughout the Middle East. The group has even claimed responsibility for the crash of that Russian jetliner over Egypt's Sinai Peninsula that killed all 224 aboard. So why is Hillary hesitant? To talk about this, we welcome in our panel. First up, Andy McCarthy, policy fellow at the National Review Institute. He's Skyping in from New York City. We should point out, Andy is also the author of Faithless Execution, Building the Political Case for Obama's Impeachment. And joining us from Newsmax Washington, my old House colleague, former chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra. Pete, currently a Shillman Senior Fellow for the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and he's also the author of Architects of Disaster, The Destruction of Libya. Pete, first to you. Hillary's hesitant about fighting ISIS, asking for a declaration of war. She says it would put a big strain on our budget. Do you agree? Is she offering legitimate reasoning in an argument?
Well, declaring war and the implications on the budget, those two are not related. The bottom line here is I think it actually would make some sense to bring some clarity to this, have a declaration of war, clearly define the enemy for what they are and who they are, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and radical jihadist groups, so that they have a parameter as to who we are going after. I think the second thing here is that, you know, we haven't had a strategy for going after these radical jihadist groups. So having a declaration of war, identifying who they are, and also clearly identifying the rules of engagement for our military would be very, very helpful.
On another matter, Andy, we seldom get a declaration of investigation from the FBI on key public officials, and yet we understand the FBI is stepping up its investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Is it now more than just preliminary fact-finding, in your opinion?
JD, I think it's been more than that for some time now. The FBI doesn't dedicate the number of agents that have reportedly been dedicated to this investigation unless it has ripened into something of a more mature stage than just a preliminary inquiry. They've reportedly not only done that, but they're casting a pretty broad net. They've evidently asked the State Department for some pretty interesting evidence. So, you know, they're obviously not going through the motions here, and I'd be quite surprised if that were the case, for two reasons. Number one, I happen to know Jim Comey. We both started in the U.S. Attorney's Office around the same time under Rudy Giuliani. He's a straight shooter. He's a guy with integrity, and I expect he's going to do a real investigation here. And that gets me to the second point, which is a real investigation ought to make Mrs. Clinton give her a lot of anxiety, I would think, because if you look at the statutes that are involved here, and I don't think we're just talking about the statutes that relate to classified information, but if you simply stick with those, it looks to me, from here in the peanut gallery, where it's always easier, like there's some pretty clear violations of very serious felony statutes here.
We will continue to keep an eye on that, but gentlemen, in the time remaining, we would be remiss if we did not talk about Gitmo, the president insistent that he's taking a look at possible executive action to close the prison there. Former Defense Department spokesman J.D. Gordon on this very program last night, and he discussed the consequences of closing Gitmo. Here's what he had to say.
If President Obama brings these detainees to the United States, if there's not enough evidence to convict them, and since we didn't have battlefield detectives running after them in Pakistan and Afghanistan, those guys could be set free on Main Street, USA. And even if they don't get set free right away, look, Colorado, Kansas, South Carolina, they'll become bullseyes for terror attacks.
Pete, new House Speaker Paul Ryan issued a strong warning to President Obama against attempting to use that executive order. In fact, legislation has been passed expressly forbidding it. Do you think the president will go ahead with an executive order to close Gitmo?
I think this president will do just about anything to close Gitmo, and he may issue an executive order, which really will kind of potentially create a constitutional crisis between the House and the Congress and the executive branch. In the latest defense authorization bill, which passed the Senate 91-3, it prohibits the Gitmo folks from being transferred to the United States. The president ought to move away from this issue, admit he made a mistake by promising to close Gitmo, and focus on the real threats that are out there and the things that would keep America safe. This has been nothing but shadow boxing now for 7 years. It's a political gimmick. Keep Gitmo open and focus on the real issues.
Andy McCarthy, 30 seconds to you. Legally, where will this thing go?
It's a disaster for the reasons that J.D. Gordon explained to you and others. The people who are at Gitmo are there because they can't be repatriated. Obama has actually already tried to clear out the place by returning people to other countries. If they had countries willing to take these guys, they'd already be gone. So you have a situation where we're going to bring them into the United States if Obama has his way. You have a lot of judges who don't believe in law of war detention. And where are you going to put them other than out on the street in the United States?
Andy McCarthy and Pete Hoekstra, gentlemen, you have our thanks. Coming up after the break, Steve Deace and Michael Shannon weigh in on evangelical voters and where they stand on Republican candidates. That's next.